welcome to the Learning Lounge. I am Joel Gardner, and today we are talking about learner experience design. We're here with Kyle Clements. Now, you hear all of these different words: learner experience design, user experience design, human interaction design, interaction design. And if you're in the e-learning business, you've probably heard these terms bounced around, but what exactly do they mean, and how do they apply to instructional design, to learning design? So today we'll be diving into these questions with Kyle Clements, who has a background in both instructional design and learner experience design. So welcome, Kyle. It is great to have you.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
It's great to have you here. And so Kyle is a senior learning experience designer. He works for WGU Labs, which is a nonprofit innovation center associated with Western Governors University. So he designs and guides the development of products and experiences from ideation through implementation and evaluation. And I think, Kyle, you and I first met, it's got to be a couple of years ago at a conference.
Yeah.
And we've kind of stayed.
I attended your workshop, I think.
Oh, great. Yeah, that's right. So that was a couple of years ago, and we've kind of stayed in contact off and on since then. And then I know you connected with Amy, who's our producer here. So I'm glad we're able to connect.
Yeah,
so let's get into this. Quick and dirty, what is learner experience design?
Great question. I get this all the time when people hear that title. The way I like to explain it is, in my role, my responsibility is combining both learning science and user experience design. So it's bringing these two worlds together. They've largely grown adjacent to each other, but somehow haven't been as interconnected as I think they really could and should be. And so it's bringing those two realms together into a single design.
Okay. So then let's talk about that user experience design a little bit.
Yeah.
How would you define that at a high level for someone who's maybe in the learning field? They do e-learning, they do training, they do instructional design, maybe they're teachers. What's this user experience design part of it?
That's a great question. So the core of what user experience design is making design decisions based on the needs of the user, the needs or desires or goals of that user. So in education, there's a lot of stakeholders. There's a lot of people who have opinions about what the experience should look like. And so applying user experience design to this space means you're talking with the learner, you're getting feedback from the learner's point of view, you're incorporating their goals into, say, what the learning outcomes of this experience should be.
Okay, so it's user centered or user focused at least. So and then you have all these other stakeholders, and I agree with higher education. There's a ton of them. There's the teacher, for example, or different bodies within the university that might interact with the student, right? So I definitely agree that there's a lot there. So give me an example here real quick. Just some kind of an app or a tool or something that you've done user experience or learner experience design work with. Give us kind of the big picture of how you did that with this example.
Yeah, so a project I've been working on that we've been focused on at Labs is how do we help students with time management? Over and over, this skill, this ability is shown to be one of the biggest barriers students have to success in their college experience.
Okay.
So we got this broad problem, and we were specifically designing for students in a college prep type course, so at the beginning of their college experience. And a subject matter expert we were working with on this, his point of view was that too often we jump to strategies like teach people how to calendar, teach people how to do this without waking them up to the problem underlying in their personal lives, their problem with time management. They don't realize why they need these strategies because they're not seeing the issue. And so what came from that experience of we interviewed students to get their perspectives on time management, and the idea that came out of this was a tool that we created that we refer to as Time Coach. And the experience of Time Coach is that at the beginning of a week or whatever period of time this assignment will be used for, students go through and they estimate how much time they're going to spend on a variety of categories. So then they spend their week tracking how much they actually do spend, and then we present a results page that says, hey, you estimated this much, this is how much you actually spent. And we get all these interesting quotes, students realizing, wow, I didn't realize Netflix took up so much time, all of these things in preparation for kind of a live session discussion with their mentor where they're discussing how they're going to improve their time management and what they discovered. And throughout that process, as I get every new prototype or come up with a new idea for the direction of this product, not only am I discussing that with my team, but we're putting that in front of potential users of this product and getting their feedback. Developing the categories specifically, we really wanted to make sure this represented what people, how people would classify their time. Yeah. So that's an example of the type of project we're working on.
Okay, so maybe talk about that process a little bit more. It sounded like part of it is, at least you get some ideas going, but then you present it to the potential students or these users, these learners, and you get their feedback. So just give me maybe this overarching process that you might go through from start to finish, if there even is a finish, right?
Yeah. So just like instructional designers, user experience designers, learning experience designers have a variety of tools in their toolkit for design and for research. And so throughout this process, whether it be through interviews with students where I schedule a time to actually put the prototype in front of them and see if our design is clearly communicating how to use it and if it's clearly communicating results that students find useful. I'm putting those prototypes in front of students. I'm also doing surveys. That's how I refined the categories, for example. I wanted to see how students categorize their time, and I could facilitate that using a survey. So it's using your toolbox to find ways to get input from the users on the design decisions you're having to make each step of the way, not just after you've built a whole course, shipped that, and had a whole cohort of students go through it.
So that makes sense to me. So so instead of just isolating sort of on your own, right, or I guess functioning in total isolation and hoping that what you're coming up with will work, you're really testing ideas as you go. Sounds kind of like an agile process where you test something and you adjust. You test and adjust as you go, right? I like that. That makes sense to me. But what about someone who might say, well, what if you have a course or a learning environment or learning experience that's been designed and students, maybe it's a university course and students don't drop out and they pass the course, then are there some people who might say, well, why do you even need learner experience design if they're passing the course anyway and they're meeting the outcomes? Why would you even need that?
That's a good question. I think that perspective is really pervasive. And I feel like what it's missing is it's such a missed opportunity to not create an experience that is delightful or helpful or centered around the user's needs. We live in a time where bad experiences or good experiences, news about those spreads fast. And, I think, as you mentioned at the beginning, we're associated with Western Governors University. Over 50% of the students that come here were referred in some way. And so you begin to see there's a real power in offering positive user experiences that maybe our metrics we're tracking currently don't indicate, but you'll see the results of a positive user experience if you take the time to design it and deliver that.
And it sounds like measure that, right? Because I could be measuring,
absolutely.
They met all the outcomes and they were satisfied with the course experience, so we're good, right? Okay. Now, something you said, though, really made me think about this. You said these experiences delight them, or they're just a really great, I can't remember the exact words, a really great positive experience that they had. And so it sounds like you're talking more about this emotional component or this emotional response to a design, right?
Yeah.
And this is something, this is something that some scholars, well-known scholars in instructional design, talk about. So let's get into when you think about learning design, you really have a few domains that we kind of classify. One is the psychomotor. So this is basically physical skills, and here's how you throw a baseball, or here's how you take apart a gun in the Army or something like that, right? These psychomotor skills. Then you have intellectual skills, or cognitive skills, where it's really remembering or understanding or being able to apply this knowledge that you have. Now, the third one is the affective domain, which is really how you feel about or your attitudes about certain things. And that can be both learning how to have a different attitude, but it can also be your affective reaction to the learning experience that you have. Anyway, a lot of background. But what's interesting is that some scholars, for example, the Systematic Design of Instruction by Dick Carey and Carey, I can't remember. So they talk about how we basically ignore the affective domain in the field of instructional design. And I think it's totally true. We're so focused on, did they reach the outcomes? Can they do the thing? Instead of, was that a beautiful experience? And if you think about okay, I got to stop talking. But if you think about your best teachers that you ever had, they're the ones that made you feel differently. Certainly you were learning a lot in that given course or those courses you took from them, but you felt differently about your experience. Anyway, little side note.
Yeah, I love all of that. It totally resonates with me. You know, when I think of people who have this title, learning experience designers, you know, we are focused on the learning outcome. That is definitely, I think, something that separates this category from user experience designers, where maybe the goal is just to create a useful, delightful experience. We are focused on a learning outcome, but, you know, students are coming to our courses having lived in a world where things aren't designed the way that we design our courses. You know, things are designed to create whole experiences that are useful to them. And I think a lot of learners get into higher education specifically and just find that all of the purpose and, you know, well-designed experiences they're experiencing in their daily life as consumers is not being translated into how these experiences are being designed for them within higher ed or education more broadly.
Okay, and I think I can see a lot of truth to that. So let's talk a little bit more about that intersection between instructional design and learner experience design, or even user experience design. So we've kind of talked about them. Earlier you said these have kind of run in parallel. They've kind of developed in parallel. So you've got this really deep, rich set of research that's been around for 50 or 60 or more years, 100 thousands of years if you go way back, right, on how to help people learn. And educational technology has been incorporated into that quite a bit in the recent decades. Then you have this user experience design that's focused on some of the things you talked about. It's specific to their needs, and it facilitates the accomplishment of that task in a delightful way, right? So what are how do they intersect? What are the overlaps, if there are any? But how could we start to make these really intersect and work together for the benefit of learners?
Yeah. So I think, you know, instructional design and the use of technology in instructional design, I think, really took off with multimedia. It was when, you know, video could be added. So that whole field has developed from that kind of framework. And user experience design came out of software more generally, is kind of my view of it.
Okay.
And so, you know, I feel like in our field as instructional designers, we've lost this idea of designing for what computers are capable of. We tend to focus solely on what we can do with multimedia, with text or images. And you know, you think of, like, one of my favorites, I've got like a little exhibit for it sitting on my desk at work, is the Oregon Trail, this classic game that was built, you know, in the late 80s. And, you know, there's a whole book about this game's design that I'm just fascinated with, because the man who led its development was a computer scientist. He was thinking in terms of what can you do with a computer, and he ended up creating this whole simulation, which is something you can't create with just multimedia or text. He was using the affordances of a computer to do new ways of teaching that aren't possible with other mediums. And so I think that's a huge piece of what user experience design has to offer for instructional designers, broadening our view of what an instructional experience can be. And the other piece I think UX has to offer to instructional designers is looking at the big picture of the student's experience. Don't just think about what their experiences is in this one course or this one module of a course. Think about their identity as a student at your university, and think a little more broadly about all these touch points in their experience and if there's ways you as an instructional designer can contribute to improving that experience or integrating your course with it, go for it. Look at it a little more broadly than just the specific learning moments you're designing.
There was a lot of really good insight there, honestly. So I've been thinking about and studying and researching instructional design for a long time. But I love, in one sentence, you summarized one issue in the field of instructional design, which is we tend to focus in and lock in on this idea of excellent media. Right. And even earlier versions of our field was called, or at least areas of research within our field were called media design. That was almost what we called it, right? And so that's kind of folded into this whole idea of instructional design. That is powerful. Now, would you say that when you're experiencing learning, right? Certainly, excellent media is a component of that, because there are known principles of creating good media that help people learn and so forth, right? But it sounds like you're saying that's great and that's important, but we need to exploit all of these different capacities that technology has given us, particularly even in the last decade, the last 5 years even.
Absolutely.
Tons of technologies that have really expanded, right? Okay, this is great. Good stuff. So other examples, I'd love to hear more about really great or really bad examples of learner experience design. What else would you offer for that?
So I was thinking about that idea because I do get asked for examples a lot. And, I'm always out there looking at interesting educational experiences, and they all always have pros and cons. It's always easy to critique because I have no idea what the context of this design was. Yeah. But, so couching it with that, first of all, one great learning experience that I came across in the last few months is called Google's Morse typing trainer. It's this interesting use case. Basically, it's a tool to teach people with physical disabilities Morse code, because although they can't type, they can tap a single button to type in Morse code and to communicate.
Wow.
So this was an experience designed, and it's available free online to try out. I thought it was a really interestingly designed experience. They build into, as you're reviewing how to type these different characters, they scaffold it the whole time. If you're missing characters, they'll bring those ones up more often. They start with the simpler characters, and it gets more involved over time. And it's an example of how the system that's testing your ability is adapting to what you're giving it. So that was one I really like. It also is just a very sleek design in terms of that delight side of it. It just looks nice, and it's mobile friendly. And then kind of contrasting is, so I think some of the greatest research around learning science that's happening is coming out of Carnegie Mellon University. They've created a bunch of great products that are optimized for learning, but they're a usability nightmare. And so navigating these tools and using them either as an instructor or as a student, it's just a painful experience. And so that's an example where I see we have the best of the best in terms of design, facilitating an educational experience. But if you're not the guy or girl who helped build this, you're a little lost at how to use it sometimes. So those were a couple examples that I've seen recently that stood out to me.
Very cool. I love that. Well, so if a lot of the people that listen to our podcast and follow what we're doing here are really more from this realm of instructional design, really focused on designing great learning experiences. What's the best way for an instructional designer to really start learning about user experience design and learning experience design? What are the best resources, the best strategies for that?
really good question. And I can definitely send, I get asked this, so I have like a sheet of recommendations, but um, the Nielsen Norman group, if you look them up online, this is a group that specializes in, they do a lot of UX research. They post a lot of articles about trends in technology more generally and designing for that technology. They're a great resource for getting up to speed on some of the research practices you can do. But I also think, as you're out there reading about this, just starting to apply things. Like instead of waiting till a course launches to get some student input, put an assignment in front of a student that you have access to today and just say, what do you think about this assignment? What do you think this would be a useful exercise? Start getting that input earlier on. Don't worry about waiting until the end of term feedback report or, wherever you gather your students' feedback. It doesn't have to be after you've finished a whole design and implemented it.
Very good. I love it. That's great. And if you can get us some of those links to the resources you were talking about, we'll put it in the description so that people can dive into that. So you mentioned a few different ways that you have interacted with students. Maybe this will be our one last kind of topic here, unless you have some other things you want to add. But so you said start working with students. One way is to just show it to the students. What are some other ways you can get students' feedback? You mentioned showing it to them, letting them experience it. You mentioned surveys. What else? What are some simple ways that somebody can really start to get that feedback from learners?
So there's ways you can build that into specific assignments or products. There's tons of tools out there. If you're building custom software, that kind of thing, there's absolutely tools out there designed for giving feedback about a website that you can add to your site. I think something we've started doing, we're an online university, so though we have access to our students, we can request to set up remote interviews. Sometimes I just need to evaluate the usability of my product. Do people know where to click? So we have, throughout the summer at least, we have Food Truck Fridays here. So I'll grab my fellow designers, we'll take our prototypes out to people in line at food trucks and just watch them click through these products to see where are the things we've designed terribly. What do we need to change about this? Where were our assumptions false? That kind of thing. So there's all kinds of ways, just as long as you're getting it out to people, ideally the people who are going to be using, but just gathering feedback in any way possible.
I love that. Maybe I'll come to the Food Truck Friday.
Yeah, you'll find us out there.
Try out some products. Well, anything else you'd like to add here as we kind of wrap up the discussion? This has been fascinating. Anything you want to add, or?
Yeah, I think we love coming up with new titles all the time in this space, in education and in UX. There's titles that refer to everything, but when I think of what the best kind of instructional designer looks like and does, and what the best learning experience designer looks like and does, they're exactly the same. When you look at the people who are just killing it in both these spaces, they're doing the same kinds of things. I think it's only as we look at people who are maybe newer into the industry, we see these trends in how they go about their work. Back to focusing on multimedia or focusing on custom software type interactions. I think, though, if you look at people who are the most experienced in those two fields, you see there's a ton of alignment. They're not as distinct as maybe we'd like to make them for classifying things, but there's a lot to learn from each other and from all the fields around this space. I actually don't feel like it benefits me to think of myself just as this new term, learning experience designer. There's a lot to learn from every space adjacent to this.
Well, I love that. That's a good sentiment. And what I've noted, and as I continue to grow in my career and basically get older, right? What I find is that as I can learn from so many different fields, right? You can learn from just writing. You can learn from visual design, or from just art, or performance technology, or public relations. All of these different fields you can really start to see patterns and borrow from them for the benefit of the people you're designing for. And, I think of the field as pragmatic. We don't have to tie ourselves to one particular theoretical stance or epistemological thinking, right? We're pragmatic, and whatever works best and moves us toward the ideal of a learning experience for someone is what we do if we're good designers, right? So anyway, that's kind of what I thought of when you said that. I love that thinking. So, all right. Well, thank you, Kyle. This has been a really fun conversation. And
absolutely, my pleasure.
It's great working with you over the interwebs as we talk.
Yes.
So we'll get this posted soon, and then I'm excited to interact with you more soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Kyle.